Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Best Complete Streets Policies webinar of 2018. We're going to start in a few minutes while we wait for people to join, but while we do, we'd love for you to fill out this interactive poll where you describe which one of these boxes best suits your role. So you can just click on your screen, and then we'll show the results in about 2 minutes. Great, and thank you for participating in that survey. I love to see the varied amounts of people joining us. No elected officials, so next time you join one of our webinars, oh wait, we have an elected official who's speaking today who clearly didn't fill out this poll. Sorry, we're having a lot of fun getting started over here. I'll let him introduce himself in a bit. But let's get started on the webinar. So thank you again for joining us for the Best Complete Streets Policies of 2018. If we haven't met, my name is Emiko Atherton, and I serve as the director of the National Complete Streets Coalition that created this report and has worked with many of your communities to create great complete streets policies. Although you can't see them, I did want to let you know Heather Zaccaro and Natasha Riverone from the Complete Streets team are in the room. Heather will be handling questions later. And Natasha is really the mastermind behind this report and this webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Natasha at the end. She is the policy master in our office and helped grade each one of these policies, and just a big public thank you to her. So I wanted to actually get started with some history of where this movement has gone. So when we began tracking Complete Streets policies in 2005, just 35 communities had adopted Complete Streets policies. Just over a decade later, at the close of 2018, that number stood at 1,477 policies, 66 of which were passed in the last year. These policies have been instated at all levels of government in all types of communities. So we have one in New York City, our largest city in the country, and in communities as small as Corinth, Kentucky, population 230. We're so happy to congratulate the 66 communities that passed Complete Streets policies this year and to highlight the top 10 in our report, the Best Complete Streets Policies of 2018. It's been an encouraging decade of progress, but I do want to note that pedestrian fatalities are continuing to rise, so the need for these policies doesn't decrease. For instance, our landmark report showed, Landmark Dangerous by Design report showed that between 2008 and 2017, approximately 50,000 people were struck and killed while walking. The deaths of people on foot increased an astonishing 35% over that decade, even as all traffic fatalities trended downward. What that means is that we're killing more people than ever before, even as we continue to build a transportation system that prioritizes the movement of vehicles over lives, economic opportunity, or climate change. We need to do better. So while we know that policies alone won't create safer streets, unless those communities implement them in ways where change actually gets built, where those projects get built, and how they're designed, we feel like the policies that we're highlighting this time are really exemplary, and we have a lot of hope that these policies will turn into practice. Just as a reminder, last year the Coalition raised the bar on what makes a good Complete Streets policy by creating a new framework for grading Complete Streets policies. We based this framework really using a national committee that looked at what are the ideal elements of a policy that actually turns into practice. Two key changes that we made throughout this framework are first, requiring a clear path for implementation, and second, requiring a tangible plan for equity, or how a community will prioritize its most vulnerable users, including people of color and older adults. If you're interested, this resource, The 10 Elements of Complete Streets Policies, is available on our website for free. If you go and download it, you can see what we are looking for when we are reviewing our policies, as well as how we allocate points when we grade those policies. There are also many free resources out there to help you advance Complete Streets in your jurisdiction. If you have a question or are looking for a resource, feel free to type it into the chat box below, and if they can, we'll address it during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So those questions will be directed at both staff here, but also the speakers. So we're really excited for this report because 2018 was the first time we used this new framework to grade policies, where we raised the bar. And to be frank, I was pretty nervous to see if we'd have communities that were able to meet this new bar. And I'm happy to say that we had 10 communities that rose to the challenge. And today we'll hear from representatives of 3 of the top 10 communities, all of them bringing a different perspective on the process of passing a Complete Streets policies. We'll hear from representatives from Neptune Beach, Florida. For those of you who don't know, that's around the Jacksonville area. We'll also hear from representatives from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And then last, we'll hear from a representative from Cleveland Heights, Ohio. But first, we'll start with Fred Jones, the Vice Mayor of Neptune Beach. I'm happy to call Fred a friend and steering member of the National Complete Streets Coalition. He's also a certified planner with a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Florida State University. He's currently a senior project manager with Michael Baker International and has over 15 years of public and private sector experience for a variety of community planning and mobility projects. His expertise includes multimodal transportation planning, corridor studies, complete streets, traffic impact analysis, public engagement, as well as extensive experience in regulatory issues and mixed-use development. Fred says his undergraduate training in anthropology led to his career in planning, as he believes urban planning is anthropology. As I mentioned, Fred is also a member of the National Complete Streets Steering Committee and an elected official who did not check the box. But Fred, with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emiko. I was trying to see if anybody else would click it first so I wouldn't be the 0.1% elected officials that that didn't sign up for the webinar, or maybe they just didn't follow the instructions as well. But thank you for that introduction, and we're very honored as the city of Neptune Beach. As Emiko pointed out, we are a small coastal community in the Northeast Florida market, so for those that are at their computer, if you happen to just pull up Google Maps and search Neptune Beach and kind of get your geographic bearings in Florida, we're in the Northeast Florida area, and we're one of 3 independent municipalities in the Jacksonville, Duval County metropolitan statistic area. It's a consolidated government, but as far as Neptune Beach is concerned, we're about 6 square miles. Actually, about 2.3 of that is land area, and we're about 7,500 residents. Great place to come. I always encourage people to come and spend their money in our coastal community, in our wonderful town center. But again, as it relates to complete streets, what we were looking for here, and of course, me drinking the Kool-Aid, I thought having the opportunity to be an elected official, it just became a natural transition for me to say this is something that we kind of need to do. The city already has pretty good bones, but I think from a policy standpoint and an implementation standpoint, I think we could certainly do a bit better, and I think we have a really great opportunity to build infrastructure that accommodates all users and supports this mission. So from a just kind of a purpose standpoint, I think I'm going to really kind of talk about 4 major buckets: why we did it, the importance of communication, touch a little bit about our policy framework, and then really what's the next steps in terms of implementation and accountability. The big thing, and I say this a lot when I either do technical trainings or just across the country, Florida, as everybody knows, is sort of ground zero for pedestrian deaths. And so it doesn't matter. It's like every time that next edition of Dangerous by Design comes out, we're all wondering, particularly the top 10 municipalities that continue to be on this list, which place we're going to be in. And I think in 2016, Jacksonville was number 3. We improved markedly to number 6. So it's really quite tragic. And so the idea was just, we're part of this metropolitan area, and what can we do to just get ourselves off the list or improve our standings, because it's truly become a public health crisis. As I mentioned, this is an opportunity for us. While it's a very active community, it's a coastal community. People are always riding their bikes and their skateboards up and down First Street and A1A, but I think the idea was just to kind of rethink some of the opportunities. We have good right-of-way, we've got good bones, and let's try to, move the needle. And given our size and our resources, we have about a $5 million budget, which doesn't lend itself to do really huge, robust infrastructure. And then we have stormwater needs, is that we've got to be able to have something that's doable, and to build a complete street-driven capital improvements program that can demonstrate accountability and have some measures of success for us. As I mentioned early on, communication is really key, and I think everybody across the country that's doing this stuff recognizes the power of messaging. The first thing is a lot of people don't even really know. I mean, you throw that term out, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so for us, it's really about, embracing the active lifestyle, focusing on business development, economic development, and safety. There's a lot of different angles and messages that you can use for this, and I think there's a lot of multi-tiered benefits. But for us, those were really the 3 powerful things, and to sort of talk about placemaking, community building, and that's what resonated with the balance of the city council. Serving as vice mayor, making sure that we have our leadership and staff on board, and those citizens and some of the folks that get on Facebook that typically challenge any changes. Everything's perfect. We don't want to do anything. We wanted to make sure we got to them first and make sure that the message resonates, and showing them examples, and whether they've traveled to other places or even the good places within our own community that we don't recognize, but they're actually, that's a complete street, and just showing them what it is right there, and then, oh, voila, a light bulb goes off, and people get behind you. And ultimately, too, really starting with some meaningful demonstration projects. We don't have tremendous amounts of resources, but we have the opportunity within our rights of way to do some demonstration projects in the next few years that can really build more enthusiasm and momentum. From a policy framework standpoint, really it was about, for us, just building the network. We do have a natural, in certain parts of the community, particularly towards the ocean, we have a nice gridded street network. To the west, there's some places that typical dendritic street network that's not well connected but offers the opportunity to build upon. We also have, of importance, we have the East Coast Greenway that comes directly through our community, right through the heart of it. And a lot of people didn't even know what that was. And then, so trying to sell them that, guys, we have a trail project, a greenway that runs from Maine to Key West, and it comes right through the heart of our community. That's a huge opportunity and selling point. And so for us, that was a key thing that we wanted to use as sort of, I think, a catalytic project. And how do we connect the bones better to the greenway and just make it safe? I mean, again, kids walking to school, biking to the beach, what have you, coming to our wonderful town center, they should be able to do that without driving and feel like they're not going to get run over. And the other thing is that we wanted to make sure we incorporated this into all the phases and processes from planning through, from our concept to the concrete, so to speak, and making sure that community development department, public works, police chief, everybody is really drinking the Kool-Aid, and everybody's on the same page, and we can really work together collaboratively to develop a list of a few projects in the next 4 or 5 years that are going to help us move the needle in terms of safety. The other big thing was, a small community, we don't have our own design standard. We're really standing on the shoulders of giants, so we said, hey, NACTO has great guidance. There's stuff from IPE. There's a lot of guidance from the Federal Highway Administration that we just wanted to use. And we said that's what we're going to use. We're going to stand on the success of others and really use cutting-edge toolkits and guidance as a framework because, for us, the local streets that we control, we really have an opportunity to be innovative and forward-thinking in that respect. And the other thing it was built around was really this very easy concept for everybody to understand was just high-need areas to say, look, I can talk to the police. We have a clear demonstration of need in terms of injuries to cyclists and pedestrians at various locations. We even talked about where we're seeing the presence of driving under the influence cases and using those as focal points to say that's where we should really start. And it's not rocket science, but it gives everybody a good point of departure to make sure that we're implementing, connected, safe, and continuous infrastructure throughout the city. And the other thing too, it kind of gets into this implementation, is that we really wanted to minimize the exceptions. As far as I'm concerned, there should be no exceptions. And I think with a community of our scale, we have the opportunity to really, implement these types of countermeasures and really inspirational infrastructure, I think is the way that we want to think about this, into our policies and into our community. So we wanted to make that sort of front and center, that unless there's some really out of the ordinary situation associated with cost, and we don't really have limited access facilities in our community, there really should be no excuse in terms of thinking differently and implementing a complete street framework in our infrastructure. The other big piece here too, we know that performance measures and accountability is going to be really critical moving forward, but we wanted to make sure that we had that, but at the same time knowing our staff resources, it wasn't going to be anything that was overly onerous. Simple things like, hey, we can do these projects and we can demonstrate, how many new miles of safe bicycle infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure. That could just be like, how many sidewalk gaps did we complete this year? How many ADA improvements did we complete this year? And, really, are we able to tie that into the reduction of collisions and injuries and fatalities by mode? So stuff that we can easily measure and show as demonstrating our success as we do this over the next couple of years. And the most important thing here is really we want to build a CIP that's complete street driven. And from a funding standpoint, I mentioned we don't have a huge budget, but our idea is to look at general fund. We just passed a parking pilot program that's going to generate new revenues from paid parking. In fact, that was probably a bigger list than the complete street ordinance. And then looking at grants and other agency partnerships, so that overall we're going to have a successful program that really kind of changes the thinking and the paradigm in Neptune Beach, and I think people, and embraces our active lifestyle here. And I think it's a good sort of model for other smaller communities that are looking to make a difference in this space and not be in a scenario that's an overly burdensome or onerous policy. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over. I think my 10 minutes are up, so I'll turn it back over to you guys to hand off.
Great. Thank you so much, Fred. That was outstanding. Next up We are going to hear from the City of Milwaukee and the Wisconsin Bike Fed. I do want to remind people at this time that if you have questions, we'll be able to get to we won't probably be able to get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can after all the speakers present, so please type them in the chat box of your lower left-hand screen. Next, I want to introduce Carissa Givens, who is the Milwaukee Community Projects Coordinator with the statewide nonprofit Wisconsin Bike Federation. In the Milwaukee chapter, she works with a team of bike walk advocates that support and initiate both local and statewide bike ped policies, host a robust Safe Routes to School program, and offer bike walk safety education to the general public. Carissa has 8 years of combined experience as a Safe Routes to School educator, bike share programming manager, and bike walk advocacy organizing. She is also currently the project coordinator for Advancing Healthier Wisconsin Partnerships Program, a system change grant that is focused on implementing the city's Complete Streets policy, along with the City of Milwaukee's Department of Public Works and other government agencies, including City Development and the Department of Public Health. And she's also just a joy to be around. And next, I want to introduce James Hanning, who is the Pedestrian and Bicycle Coordinator for the City of Milwaukee's Department of Public Works. He is part of the Department of Public Works' new multimodal unit, which is leading the way with implementing the city's Complete Streets policy. He has over 12 years of transportation and design experience with a focus on multimodal transportation and environmental justice. In his current role, he manages various pedestrian and bicycle-related programs and projects, including Milwaukee's first citywide pedestrian plan, bike share programming, and several bike boulevard projects. Welcome to you both, and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Emiko. Well, hello, everyone. I guess good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're very happy to be here and honored to be part of this year's cohort of Complete Streets policies. We thought we'd just start with a little bit of background in case you're not familiar with Milwaukee. We're the largest city in Wisconsin and located on the western shore of Lake Michigan, and we're actually about 90 miles north of Chicago. We're happy to also boast that just this week we were awarded League of American Bicyclists Bike-Friendly City or Community status of silver, and as Emiko mentioned, we're just about ready to launch our first ever citywide pedestrian plan. So there's, as you can see on the map, there's a good coverage of bike facilities in Milwaukee, but there, as we'll touch on a few minutes, there are definitely some gaps, but I think we have some exciting momentum and a lot to look at, but we also have a long way to go in some respects. So we also thought we'd give a little bit of background on Complete Streets in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. Milwaukee has a pretty strong history of implementing Complete Streets, but we've never had a formal Complete Streets policy. In fact, our first bike plan was done in 1993. And the state of Wisconsin had a Complete Streets policy that they passed in 2009. And it went a long way in really supporting Complete Streets in projects that were federally and state funded. However, you know, there were some that thought that it was prescriptive and maybe not always compatible with surrounding land use. It was a fairly strong policy, and possibly as a result, in 2015, the policy was actually repealed, and we found ourselves with a really big hole in Complete Streets policies and tools to really push for projects at the city. So about that time in 2015, our Department of Public Works took on the challenge, and we began developing a policy for the city that allowed for some creative solutions and really acknowledged like neighborhood context. We really wanted to get at that there was no one model for complete streets. Like what looks a complete street in our industrial harbor is going to look different than a complete street next to a school or a park in a residential neighborhood. And so we really developed a policy, and we're working on a policy that challenged us to think of kind of the highest and best use of our public right-of-way and really define streets as places for people.
Hello, everyone. So, as James mentioned, the Complete Streets policy procedure, actually formulating it within the city of Milwaukee, started in 2015. But the Wisconsin Bike Federation and many other outside stakeholders who value safer streets for all mode share really started to step up and say that we need more people involved in this process. And it probably wasn't until maybe about 2017 that wonderful individuals from the Wisconsin Bike Federation, specifically Jessica Weinberg, who I consider my mentor, who started this project, worked with the American Heart Association to make sure that the community was really involved in the process of building the policy. So we, like many places, we wanted to form a coalition. And our coalition is made up of many outside stakeholders, community organizations, individuals, but the core group is really made up of community groups that work within some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city. And these are individuals that we've been working with for over a decade within our Safe Routes to School program, as I mentioned, some of the activities that I'm involved in. We also have a general education called Share and Be Aware, and we were also doing a lot of very focused programming within neighborhoods. We actually did safe bike walk programs within zip codes. So a lot of these people who we're working with for, like I said, over a decade, they were already speaking the language and asking the same questions that we were. So forming that coalition was really not challenging whatsoever. And a lot of other people who were learning about what we were doing through our social media campaigning and just showing up at as many events as possible, wanted to be a part of the coalition as well and sign on to it. So let's see what we got here. Oh, collaboration and policy. Well, so I don't know if, James, you want to speak to that?
So we kind of divided kind of the next couple slides into, how collaborative the process has been both in developing the policy and then also now as we begin to implement the policy. So, there was some effort that the Department of Public Works had already undertaken as early as 2015, and we were really taking the lead on drafting the policy and doing a lot of the initial research of best practices and really we were developing the actual draft documents. And maybe I should, at the end of the slide, we'll have a link to the actual policies. We have a council resolution that really spells out all of the value statements and commitments that our Complete Streets, that embodies our Complete Streets policy. And then we also have an ordinance that established a Complete Streets committee. So in 2015, 2016, we had a consultant on board to develop some of the initial drafts. And we were obviously staying in tune with the National Complete Streets Coalition best practices, and even had an opportunity to sit down with coalition staff to walk through and kind of refine our policy, which is a really great resource. And I think, Caressa, you can speak a little bit more toward like the community side of what you guys were doing.
Yeah, so I came on in 2018, and we were already kind of pushing ahead full steam. And the thing that I noticed, first off, is the community coalition was really involved in that drafting process, going through the draft line by line and sitting together and looking at that. We also looked at policies and practices, of course, within peer cities, but we also looked outside of transportation to get a broad sense of how policies come about, how others within our community are taking action on their own policies, and then where our shared values are. So we might not always be so in tune with our interests, but where can we find those intersections? For example, one of the things that we did was we talked to our Black Holocaust griot about policies historically in Milwaukee, and particularly how fair housing has come about in the city of Milwaukee, which is not unique to cities across the country. And we really his information really resonated with us. So that's how we helped contribute to the development of the policy. Outside of the coalition, many groups recognized the outreach and wanted to understand where their work fit into this policy. They wanted to endorse it and plan for future implementation through their other projects. So those are good indicators that we're sort of broadening our coalition and working on a multi-sector level to increase the impact of our efforts. We also met with all of our Common Council members, aside from meeting with the Department of Public Works and the Common Council members. We really wanted to, we brought constituents to the table and set up opportunities for people to talk about what they were learning on the campaign and actually articulate that to their elected official. So they got that one-on-one time and were able to kind of practice what they were learning. So sort of like a train-the-trainer experience.
And so the collaboration that continued in developing the policy has also been crucial and continued as we begin to implement. And as I mentioned, one of the key parts of the policy that we really are holding up right now is the development of this Complete Streets Committee, which was actually a concept that was largely borrowed from Baltimore, and which I believe is also in the top policies as well. So kudos to you guys if you're listening. But this committee is consisting of a number of department heads at the city, a few chairs of council committees like Public Works and Public Safety, and a few community representatives as well, including our Bicycle and Pedestrian Task Force. So this group is really charged with helping all these city departments get on the same page and really prioritize the implementation of Complete Streets so that all of our policies and procedures at the city are aligned toward making safe and complete streets. And I think we're also very lucky that we have two really core keystone projects that are underway and funded right out of the gate. And I'll just speak really briefly to the one that DPW is leading, which is the development of a Complete Streets Handbook, which is being funded through some federal Transportation Alternative Program grant funding. And it's really going to develop a document of policy and processes that will help us implement essentially Complete Streets in all levels. And Chris, I know you can speak more to this.
And the other group that we've formed through this system change grant is a Complete Streets implementation team, which focuses on putting these modules into practice. So I know we're running a little bit low on time, so I just want to mention that the Complete Streets implementation team to help guide the Complete Streets Committee is made up of the Safe and Healthy Streets Grant Group, the Department of Public Works, Department of Community Development, and the Milwaukee Department of Health. So working across these groups internally in the city to leverage for more funding, to increase our engagement efforts, and just be speaking the same language, right? Not working in silos.
Yeah. And we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the equity component of our Complete Streets policy. We'll fully admit that it could be stronger, but we're proud of what's there, and it took a lot of conversations. And we just want to, recognize that Milwaukee is, like the Brookings Institution report from earlier this year, essentially identified us as the most racially segregated city in the country. So our policy recognizes that there are disparities in disinvestment, and it's disproportionate among low-income and communities of color. And while the Complete Streets policy isn't the solution, we see it as a framework for really navigating hard conversations in how we're approaching transportation design and construction. And I don't know, Caressa.
Well, in addition, that we view Complete Streets actually equals complete communities. So when we say that, again, focusing on multi-sector work, cross-departmental collaboration, by design is meant to establish a clear understanding of equity, so in turn we can operationalize it. So the Safe and Healthy Streets team exists now to really bridge the gap of communication between public agency and residents, especially residents living in vulnerable communities. And that really, to us, what that means is building relationships, spending time with people, and setting up ongoing training and new hire training that addresses the true definition of equity and how to design and engage with people through a relative circumstances and relative context.
Yeah. And the proof in the pudding is making sure that we have meaningful community engagement to make sure that we understand what the needs of all people in Milwaukee are. So the next few slides are just links. Feel free to check out our policy, and we'd be happy to share it and tell you more about it. And here's our contact information. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Heather and Nemiko.
Thanks so much. That was fabulous. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Richard Wong, who is the Planning Director for Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And Cleveland Heights also had the #1 Complete Streets policy in 2018. Richard is an architect, and as the Planning Director for Cleveland Heights, he's been there since 1994, helping plan for a sustainable future through infrastructure modifications, zoning regulations, and public education. He can be seen smiling each day on his bike to work, not because it's healthy, financially prudent, or good for the environment, because it's fun. We're so glad to have you with us today, Richard, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. What better way to kick off this segment than to recite a short poem called The Complete and Green Streets Primer. Cleveland Heights style. Streets should be for everyone. It should be a right. Here's how to begin your insight. Connect with the National Complete Streets Coalition. Dedicated staff on a righteous mission. They taught the importance of helping my city. Cleveland Heights is 46,000, sitting pretty. We're on a hill, but down to earth. To convince City Council of this project's worth, a Smart Growth America study was cited. The powerful findings within ignited people's attention citywide, learning that nearly the same number died trying to be pedestrians on American roads as the total population in Cleveland Heights abodes. From 2005 to 2014, the numbers were truly obscene. Use the Coalition's report as a playbook. Change the future. Give it a look. Intent and commitment to choose. Streets complete and a pleasure to use. Outdoor dining at the Rib Cage near Cedar and Lee, where you will find sticky barbecued glee. Get decision makers on your side, pushing for greatness citywide. Luna Bakery and Cafe, Barrio, tacos, tequila, and whiskey at Cedar Fairmount. More places to eat, too many to count. And now, it's time for the end of my rhyme. The city created a transportation advisory committee that includes planning, police, and public works staff with citizens representing schools, businesses, transit riders, the disabled, pedestrians, and cyclists. They meet monthly and discuss the latest studies and projects. Focuses on the most vulnerable and the least mobile. They and we operate with urgency, knowing that complacency perpetuates a nasty future. The city began a curb ramp program with the goal of correcting 900 missing or non-ADA compliant ramps. This year, $180,000 was funded for over 100 ramps. We consider each project an opportunity for change. Some infrastructure fund only takes a turn of the wrench by the fire department, whereas other projects, such as adding buffers to bike lanes, was $24,000. The several feet of separation give risk-averse riders additional comfort. And the road's pavement width did not change, but motorist lanes were narrowed to reduce speeding, weaving, and passing on the parkway. At a particularly tricky intersection, one of the region's first bike boxes was added to allow bicyclists a preferred position at the light. The traffic signal will be equipped with a detector to give the cyclist a green phase before the motorists. The exception process should be transparent. City staff are up for the challenge to find ways to improve status quo on every project. Some best practices like this are just paint that we can certainly afford. Drivers can more easily see the ladder style than the two stripes. Especially helpful when walking with two little ones at night. Complete streets attributes are imposed on all projects. In 2012, the city went through a comprehensive zoning code sustainability audit. Over 100 changes were prepared for City Council's review to encourage sustainability. Parking was zoned so it can't be in front. That's for pedestrian amenities. It then made sense to require that every building have an entrance from the main road. New buildings must also have no less than 60% glass across the front. The older buildings in our district are delightful in that respect, so we want new buildings to contribute too. Parking for bikes was codified. Based on building area and type of use, short-term and sometimes long-term covered bike parking is required. Another useful amenity is that bike repair station in the lower right with air pump and tools for under $2,000. The city's encouraging these in our commercial districts and parks. We expect our consulting engineers to be up on the latest case studies, practices, guides, and trends. This is an accessible van on-street spot with extra width and a ramp in case you're in a scooter or chair. We get impatient and sometimes draw ideas ourselves. In this case, we showed how to improve a popular path from the grocery store to the bus stop. And yes, it was built and it's still well used. That stop in front of City Hall includes amenities for the bus riders. In a commercial district called Coventry Village, there's a streetscape packed with art, flowers, trees, and benches. Each iron railing tells a story about a notorious or colorful business. Here's an example of public policy resulting in more efficient use of land. At the landlocked public high school, it underwent a massive renovation. For larger athletic fields and more green space, some staff parking was allowed to be back-in diagonal parking on an adjacent street. Since it was just for teachers, we wrongly thought they would all be good with following the rules on the signs. The mixed success occasionally requires police to ticket faculty who flunk the back-in part of back-in angled parking. One of the most useful measuring devices are automatic counters. In 2017, a pedestrian counter provided from NOACA, our metropolitan planning agency, recorded almost 250,000 pedestrian detections on a sidewalk to University Circle. That made the case for traffic calming at this intersection to help pedestrians cross comfortably. Excess asphalt areas are being cut out to become bioretention basins, and crosswalks will be shorter. Guidelines staff used to prioritize capital projects include a numerical ranking system. A project sustainability was an added category because of this policy. The more sustainable, the higher the number of points, and the more likely something will be funded. Implementation is everything. Without teamwork and the funds to make it happen, this policy would not help anyone. The master plan adopted by the city in 2017 recommended a complete and green streets policy. The county planners who prepared the master plan also suggested studying the potential for a multi-purpose path separated from the motorists on one of our main arterials. So that's the Cleveland Heights story. And now back to the Righteous Coalition.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our presenters. This is Heather Zaccaro. I'm the program manager here at the National Complete Streets Coalition, and we've got about 15 minutes, 10 minutes for questions and answers. As a reminder, you can submit questions for any of our presenters in the chat box on the bottom left corner of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and answer the first question. Are you going to be sharing these presentations? Yes, we are recording this webinar now, and we will publish a recap blog post with links to the recording, a PDF of the presentations, as well as the answers to some of the questions that we don't have time to get to today. So if you've asked a question and you don't hear it answered now, fret not, we will be answering more of them on our website. Stay tuned. The first question for all of our presenters is, what were your biggest challenges or arguments against the policy, and how did you overcome them? And anyone is welcome to chime in first.
This is Fred from Neptune Beach. Ours was probably, there was a universal sentiment that everything was good, and there may not have been a reason to do it. And I think the idea was just to make sure that our value proposition for doing it, including business development and walkability, those key messages, and safety, I think that was enough to get the council or the balance of council and staff on board. Actually, staff was on board, but just I think the balance of elected officials. And once we just started having conversations about this, and some presentations and some imagery, they were on board. But I think that's sometimes a common occurrence is that people aren't, it's just not in their frame of mind to say, hey, we got to do this. And that was a way that we did it.
Yeah, and if they raise or they debate about issues, you try to meet them straight on and try to address whatever shortcomings they see in the plan.
This is Caressa. I think from the advocate's perspective, one of the most challenging things is on the sort of the grassroots campaign effort, meeting and discovering the value of each group or individual and what their interests are in complete streets. So, while one, an elected official might be very interested in that aspect from an economic standpoint, somebody else might be interested in that from a just like a safety and security standpoint, like an individual, and being able to string together that purpose and make sure that those people are still tuned in, buying in, and listening when you're telling these stories to large groups of people or individuals, or like switching back and forth to those individual or group priorities, and still like maintaining a consistency in the language. And I guess I would say, I don't know if we necessarily overcame it, but we definitely identified it early on and just tried to be very conscientious of how that message goes out, so that ultimately people they know about it, they're aware of it, and they can use the language that they've been taught to articulate their needs ongoing.
Yeah, and I'd second that, and I'd just probably just also add that in the actual, like, I don't know, logistics of developing various drafts, like we had to have a lot of patience, because when you're designing a policy by committee, you can workshop wording, at hours at length, and, I think recognizing that it wasn't always going to be the perfect policy, but having language that we could all get behind and understand how it would, what values it was stating and how it would be implemented. So always trying to keep focused on, like, how will this be useful in having a policy at the city?
Yeah. That's a very good point, again, about not having everything perfect and spending owners' time wordsmithing. I think there were some elements of it that weren't exactly where we wanted it to be, but I think the idea of just getting it adopted, and then, you can make changes and modifications along the way, but just don't let the mission, get superseded by the wordsmithing and the process.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. James, I believe it was you that just mentioned committees, and that's a perfect tie into our next couple of questions. We got a lot of questions about working together across different departments within your jurisdiction or with other groups and members from your community. So the questions are, if you have a committee either that helped to write or adopt the policy or one that will help implement it, who's involved? Who do you think is important to be a part of those teams? And how can you motivate people from other departments and agencies to participate in Complete Streets?
Yeah, so we could have a whole webinar on that, I think. I would say having someone that's the keeper of the document was very important. So for us, it was our multimodal unit within the Department of Public Works. So I would say, and then having strong partnership with the Bike Fed and Safe and Healthy Streets, which was a local coalition previously called Path to Platinum, that was able to bring in the community voice and make sure that we were bringing the right people to the tables to make sure that, like as Caressa mentioned in the presentation, like making sure that public health and the public voice was incorporated into the policy, because if it's a public works that's drafting the policy, it has a tendency to be slanted toward infrastructure development in particular. And in terms of implementation, so the Complete Streets Committee that we created in Milwaukee, as I mentioned, is primarily department heads, so our Commissioner of Public Works, City Development, Neighborhood Services, and the full list is in the draft, but then also key decision makers on our council being represented through the chair of Public Works Committee, Public Safety Committee, our Zoning, Neighborhoods, and Development Committee, and I think, Caressa, if you want to speak more to the community side.
Coming on a little bit later, I had to do a lot of turning over stones to discover what was actually happening in this process. And, this government agency is not unique to any other government agency, especially in big cities, whether they're low capacity within public works and they've been kind of doing the same thing over and over, they can be black boxes. So as an advocate, I would say for those advocates out there, be fearless, keep asking questions, don't be afraid to say, I think that you should get the more community voices involved in the process. And thankfully, in this situation, the invitation was extended for us to be able to actually look at that document and be able to work on it together. And it's still a process because bureaucracy has a lot of red tape and there's a lot of rules and things like that. But we've learned a lot about the way our public agency functions, and I think that our relationship is becoming better. But I like to think, and I do think that the people that we work with in our public agencies still know that we are always advocates. So making sure that you always balance those sensibilities as an advocate is incredibly important. So be fearless, speak up.
I like it. I was going to say that our mayor a couple of years ago established we had a series of committees that the various council members would sit on. There'd be a transportation and parking, a land use and parks, and we created this strategic planning committee, which was sort of new. And it really was just a forum to brainstorm, big picture ideas. I mean, nothing was off the table. And that became a really easy forum to say, hey, complete streets. I mean, we were able to do we talked about how to do traffic calming in this, how do we do more public art, and as well as this complete streets framework. So that's sort of the genesis of it, just being able to have a forum where we could really think long term about our community. And then through those committees, we work that up into the council process where we get the support. But I think that really helped out tremendously versus having kind of a lone voice that is trying to push something through.
This is Richard Wong from Cleveland Heights. The other thing that you do once you get a couple projects done is you highlight the pieces, the elements that make it complete. And it's great to have people running around from the neighborhood saying, I want one of those. I want one of those crosswalks with the flashing beacons. Why can't I have the bump outs on the curbs to make my crosswalk shorter? Once you try those things and people see that they are successes, your colleagues and other people, the decision makers, get behind it.
Yeah, amen to that. One of the things that we shared a little bit, there is and it's in the last picture of my slide deck, is there is a new dog park / brewery that located right next to the East Coast Greenway. And I think just telling that story about and why they selected that site and really reinforcing the ability to do that, this is a place where people are going to come, they're going to spend their American Express cards for the weekend and stay, and showing how doing these types of projects is supporting businesses was a huge message in itself. So it was something along the lines of just like, look at what's there now because of this facility and people are like, wow, we want more of that. So that type of messaging is just really powerful.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that, I mean, that's a big component too in our policies, like identifying sort of what data needs we'll need for tracking how well we're doing in implementation. And so I know a key component of that, which we're already doing and looking to bolster, is kind of like before and after studies, just as a very basic thing that we could be doing.
Thanks, everyone. I hate to cut this conversation off. We are getting a little bit short on time, so we have time for one more quick question. But as I said before, if you've asked a question, there are so many really good ones here in the queue. We're going to send those around to the presenters and answer them in our recap blog post. So the very last question, we'll try to keep our answers short because I know we could talk about this for a long time. One of the things we really tried to stress in our new Complete Streets policy framework, and something that all 3 of your communities really rose to in your policies, is moving forward to implementation. Writing a policy that's going to set you up to succeed, and not just to sit on a shelf, but to really make a big difference in how you go about maintaining and operating and designing your streets. So this question is, how are you going to evaluate the success of your policy moving forward?
Well, for Neptune Beach, as I kind of articulated early on, we've got some fairly easy measurable performance metrics that we're going to be looking at. And I think early on we're going to build this publicly transparent capital improvements plan that everybody can say, here's what we're going to do with some timelines. And so, we're going to be held accountable from just the public when we say, hey, we're going to do these 3 projects this year. And if we don't get them done, I mean, there will be questions. But I think just being really transparent and showcasing what it is that you want to do, tying some funding to it, and then after a period of time, kind of looking at, what were we able to really accomplish, and celebrate that and look at some of the other safety elements as well. So that's our intent.
In Milwaukee, our first Complete Streets Committee was on March 15th, and a lot of it was just kind of getting everyone introduced and on the same page. But we really see the key component being how that committee meets, how they prioritize various efforts, and every year making sure that their annual report is carefully crafted and scrutinized, and every year we'll be able to see how our progress has been. So a lot of it will be that reporting within that group, but I think even just these two projects we mentioned too, with developing a handbook and with the Safe and Healthy Streets collaboration, I think those are going to be some quick wins that we can have.
Oh, I was going to say another thing that the Safe and Healthy Streets team is doing is in 2016 we created a bike walk safety report card for every single district in the city. We look at like our national nonprofit report cards for various bike ped safety measures, from the League to People for Bikes, Smart Growth America, and we really think that it's important to create a local report card so there's a more concentrated understanding of the real outlook. So, for instance, miles of bike lanes, number of ped bike crashes, number of schools within your district that are engaged in bike walk safety programming. But another thing that we're working on right now is working with the health department to focus on qualitative information and looking at where health intersects with planning and adding it to that report so that it's not just the city putting out information about bike walk safety throughout the city. Like the advocates are actually creating a localized report, and we'd like to update it on a medium term. And this is really just another tool for residents and decision makers to source when they want to make changes in their neighborhood. So I think like that Richard said, the people are speaking the language and they understand what their needs are, and they're turning their complaints into solutions.
Oh, yes. There's one other thing I was thinking of in the performance measures. After you measure and you quantify things, you should report each year to the decision makers on how effective things were and how well you engage people that are normally underrepresented or forgotten, and how you considered their suggestions and what you did about it based on their input.
Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in today. We are out of time, but as I mentioned, we're going to follow up with our speakers to continue this conversation, so look for the recap blog sometime soon. Thanks for joining us, and thank you especially to Fred, Caressa, James, and Richard for taking the time to speak with all of us today. Thank you for the work that you're doing to advance Complete Streets in your communities, and congratulations on passing such strong Complete Streets policies. We are going to be off next week. Our monthly webinar series is taking a brief hiatus, but we will be back. Stay tuned. We're going to be relaunching the series under a new moniker, so stay tuned for exciting announcements coming forward. And as always, please check out our website, completestreets.org, or reach out to us at info@completestreets.org. We have plenty of resources at your disposal to help you craft and adopt and implement strong Complete Streets policies in your own communities. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.